Welcome into the ArtGibbs Sports Business podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, NASCAR is coming to Nashville, and we talk a little bit about that today, about how it happened, about Dover Motorsports, who made it happen to some degree, and what effects it might have on NASCAR, Dover, and how that works. So NASCAR in recent years, of course, has had its fair issues with stadium attendance. It used to be, many of the largest stadiums in the world were NASCAR stadiums. And Dover Motorsports, who we're going to focus on a lot on this episode because they do own the speedway where the Nashville race is going to occur, the Nashville Cup race this June, this Father's Day weekend. Even they, up in their Dover stadium, which is the other stadium that they own, they've removed seats. It peaked at 135,000 seats and is now down to 54,000 seats. And Daytona Speedway, of course, has had seats reduced, and it's something that's kind of happened throughout the sport. And now they, as potentially part of making this work, that NASCAR and Dover have kind of decided that moving to this Nashville facility with one of the weekends that they had up at Dover might be something they can help get new fans, revitalize the sport a little bit. They're trying a lot of different things, different ways to score throughout the season. But one of the big moves is bringing NASCAR to Nashville. Now, it goes into a stadium that Dover owns, that Dover built in 2001. And that could have a large effect on Dover, could have a large effect on NASCAR, and NASCAR in the Nashville area. So we're going to talk a little bit about that here today. All right, so with that being said, Dover Motorsports is a track owner in the NASCAR arena. They own the Dover Motor Speedway in Dover, Delaware, and the Nashville Motor Speedway outside of Nashville. So in Wilson County, kind of outside of Lebanon, off of 840. They own 1,100 acres with the speedway on that as well. So prior to this year, Dover operated the Dover Motor Speedway, and they had two racing events there each year. They've got 700 acres up there with the Dover Motor Speedway. There's some gaming around that. There's dog racing, horse racing, maybe just dog racing, some type of racing, and a casino and that kind of stuff up there. You can bet on the racing that occurs, dog racing. And they have a permanent easement sort of in the off season up there on that Dover Speedway. So Dover Motor Speedway had the two race weekends in Dover, and at its peak, that Dover Motor Speedway actually had 135,000 seats, which it's now down to 54,000 seats roughly. They spent some money last year pulling out grandstands there. But the big news, and kind of why I'm bringing this up now and talking about Dover now, is, NASCAR's kind of had its bumps in the past, and there's some people that think it's kind of turning the corner a little bit. Maybe that it's a good, kind of a better TV product now, maybe than it was in recent years. And certainly there's a trend just across the board of, attendance kind of dropping, in-person attendance. So we'll see what happens. But they're slated now to have the Nashville race in June. This is the first time that NASCAR has come to Nashville area since the 70s, I believe. So what Dover did was they've got these two tracks, and the Nashville track, Dover track, they own the tracks. One of their race weekends is coming from Dover to Nashville. Now, in 2001, Dover built the Motor Speedway. There was basically nothing out there. It's anyone who's familiar with the area knows you can take in between Murfreesboro and Lebanon, and there's not much there. And Dover in 2001, they went out, they built the sewage, they built the stadium, in kind of exchange for some deferred tax. But it basically sat empty. The stadium basically sat empty. I think there were a couple sort of lower tier races that occurred early on, but then no NASCAR race. They've, again, this year moved one of their races down here. I don't know the intricacies of exactly why this was the year versus another year, but certainly some of the COVID stuff that happened, the restrictions are a little bit tighter in Delaware than they are in Nashville, and they can get more people into the stadium in Nashville. Although it was recently announced that their Delaware event now can have 25% capacity. So now a little bit about NASCAR and kind of how it's set up versus these other sports. So in, say the NFL and the NBA, you've got the franchises, and those franchises are they're the ones that participate in dividing up the TV revenue. In NASCAR, the stadium owner gets the bulk of the TV revenue. So they're in some ways, they act as team owners, I guess you could say. There's roughly 30 tracks and roughly a division by 30 of the TV revenue. Now, what happens is when Dover accepts that TV revenue, they get about 90%, 10% goes straight to NASCAR, and then Dover, once they receive that TV revenue, then they contribute roughly 30% of that back to a pot for the teams to compete. So the racing teams then compete for that 30% basically, and that's the purse. Obviously, the teams go out and they get their own sponsors, and those sponsors help support the racing. That revenue from those sponsors goes to those teams. So say there's like a Lowe's race car, that's going to go to the Lowe's race car team or the Penske team or whatever. That's where that revenue is going to go. That's going to help them pay the drivers, pay the costs of racing, etc. And then they're also competing for a purse, which is made up of this 30% that was contributed by the stadium owners. So Dover's one of the smaller stadium owners. There's 3 main stadium owners. So International Speedway Corp is one of the largest. They own 13 tracks, and all told, 19 of the 36 races occur on their tracks. So just to kind of give some idea, they own the Auto Club Speedway in Fontana, California, Chicagoland Speedway, Darlington Speedway, Daytona Speedway, Daytona International Speedway, Homestead, Miami, Kansas Speedway, Martinsville Speedway, Michigan International Speedway, Phoenix Raceway, Richmond, Route 66, Talladega, Watkins Glen. So again, there's 3 main. There's the International Speedway Corporation, Dover with the 2 tracks, and then there's Speedway Motorsports LLC out of Charlotte, and they own, the Charlotte Motor Speedway, Atlanta Motor Speedway, Bristol, Kentucky, Las Vegas, New Hampshire, North Wilkesboro, Sonoma, Texas Speedway. And they have 12 of the events, 36 events occurring on their stadiums. So that's the current setup. Now, Penske did own several tracks, but in 1999 they merged with the International Speedway Corporation, or they formed International Speedway Corporation. And so those are the 3 main owners, Dover being kind of the smallest. Now, as the event in Nashville was kind of coming to fruition, Dover owned, in Nashville, they own the Speedway and land around it. Now, that's the same in Delaware. In Dover, Delaware, they actually own 700 acres, and in the woodlands of that acreage, that's actually where they host the Firefly Music Festival. So they actually host that on the grounds of Dover Motor Speedway, of course, when there's not racing going on. And they have a permanent easement with some of the track racing, dog track, I think, or something like that, that they do in the off season at that Dover Motor Speedway. But when the Nashville event was announced, Dover had 13, 14, 1,500 acres around the Nashville Speedway. Now, in their most recent filing, they actually have jettisoned several hundred acres. I think it was a total of 300, and I may have these numbers a little bit wrong, but just sort of off the top of my head, I think it was something like 300 acres that they jettisoned for $5 million. And it's a sort of a big national developer that's coming in to develop around the stadium. So, of course, like I said before, when Dover built the stadium in 2001, they had to build sewer, they had to build all kinds of stuff, and they did that sort of in exchange for deferred taxation. Now, if you drive by, there's stuff starting to pop up. But additionally, with this Nashville race coming in town, and it's set to take place until 2024, the way that they're sort of set up, at a minimum, it's going to take place till 2024. to take place at the Nashville Speedway. So the fact that you've got this race weekend, again, I think it's Father's Day weekend for the next 3-4 years. There's now other development opportunities, and obviously that land that Dover has is really growing in value. So they sold those 300 acres for the $5 million. They've still got the 1,100 acres, and probably they've got some pieces that they can break off and jettison as needed, as development and as the event sort of takes hold. And so if you look at Dover, if you kind of look at the company, you could see some of the numbers coming in from NASCAR. So just as an example, they're getting something like $35 million from NASCAR in TV money, and that's on 2 races. So you can see something like Speedway Sports, if you kind of do the math, that's, whatever that is, that's, 18 million, something like that, a race that they get initially. And again, then they've got to contribute 30% of that roughly to the team purse. So, they're kind of looking at those kind of numbers, $18 million race, and obviously Speedway and International Speedway Corporation, they're going to be getting those kind of numbers, and multiplied by 12 for Speedway Motorsports, and then obviously International Speedway Corporation times, 19. So that's kind of the TV money. And again, the way it's set up, NASCAR gets the money, about $700 million a year. They get that money, and they give about 90% of that to the stadium owners, and then the stadium owners then in turn have to contribute to a purse that the teams compete for. The teams are allowed to sell their own sponsorships and make the money from that, to pay the drivers, to pay for expenses, etc. And again, there's just 3 major stadium owners, and Dover now has taken one of their race weekends from Delaware, brought it to Nashville, and so we'll see how Nashville does as a NASCAR market. Obviously, NASCAR's had some struggles in the past. Does adding the national market help? Does it help the TV dollars? And we'll see in, I think it's in August finally that we'll see how things went in Nashville, how their ticket sales went, and we'll know a lot more. But again, it's exciting. It's a new market, Nashville, big, growing, and now it's got NASCAR coming via Dover Motorsports, and we'll see how it affects Dover. We'll see how it affects the Nashville stadium values. We'll see how it affects the NASCAR TV deals and negotiating going forward. And we'll see if people in the area show up to the Nashville event. But I just wanted to take the opportunity with this happening coming up in June to talk a little bit about Dover, a little bit about NASCAR, a little bit about the way the TV dollars work, as it compares to other sports, and hope you enjoyed.